The government, I believe, did not consult appropriately, and so we decided that we would take the government to judicial review. It's holding their feet to the fire, it's making sure they've done their appropriate governance. And this judicial review effectively challenges them with our proposition that they didn't consult appropriately.
Did the government break its own rules when it introduced inheritance tax on farmers? A High Court judge will decide. Beef and dairy farmers could have to pay a licence to farm. We find out what buying an environmental permit could mean for your livestock business. And we meet the arable growers achieving amazing yields and discover just how they do it. Welcome to the Farmers Weekly podcast. I'm Johann.
I'm Louise Impey.
And I'm Hugh. Broom.
A lot to get through this week, so without further ado, let's get straight to our top story. The High Court has confirmed an urgent judicial review into the government's handling of changes to inheritance tax, including an alleged failure to consult properly with farmers and small businesses. Behind the challenge is a campaign group called Farmers and Businesses for Fair Tax Relief, and a 2-day hearing is expected sometime in February or March. Well, Peterborough farmer Tom Martin is the lead claimant in this legal challenge, and I started by asking Tom how the action came about.
Well, clearly the government, I believe, did not consult appropriately, and so we decided that we would take the government to judicial review. It's holding their feet to the fire, it's making sure they've done their appropriate governance. And this judicial review effectively challenges them with our proposition that they didn't consult appropriately. Personally, I really believe, it was amazing after the 31st of October, wasn't it? How many other industry bodies, both within agriculture and kind of wider within the kind of finance field, came up with alternatives that actually I and we believe were better. And I think if the government had come up with an appropriate consultation, they might have had some better ideas. Their stated aim was to minimise tax avoidance and support family businesses, and obviously we all have our pretty strongly held views on the outcome of that budget. But in essence, what this is about, the long and the short of it, the beginning and the end, is that they did not consult appropriately before they made the announcement.
And you are the lead claimant, Tom, but there are other people taking this action with you. This is not just you on your own.
It's a group of family businesses. It's actually not all about farming, because of course BPR APR, this is affecting family businesses across the UK. We're having a tough time in farming, in arable farming, particularly at the moment. But of course, every family business across the UK is affected, and it's absolutely critical to these businesses. They're the lifeblood of the British economy. And so yes, it's family businesses across the UK beyond farming as well.
And if the court rules in your favour, Tom, just outline for us what happens next.
Well, let's be honest. It's not going to lead to the government necessarily changing their position. They could lose this case, be forced to consult, and still come to the same conclusion. That I'm very realistic about that. This will challenge them to properly consult. It will challenge them to speak to stakeholders within farming and within family businesses, people who are experts in this area. It will challenge them to consult those people and hopefully come up with a solution that is closer to their stated values of limiting tax avoidance and supporting family businesses. But the outcome of this case, if successful, will be that they will have to consult appropriately.
Tom, thank you for joining us here on the Farmers Weekly podcast. That's Peterborough farmer Tom Martin. Louise, an urgent judicial review of the way the government handled the inheritance tax saga, dare I say it. Important to say this isn't about overturning the decision, it's about the process that was followed. And Tom Martin and these other claimants arguing that the government was wrong to introduce this policy without adequate consultation.
Yes, that is what it's about. And I think an awful lot of people would agree that the government was wrong. And actually, most people would say the government is still wrong with pursuing it, but that's another subject, really. It's not going to make a huge difference, is it, in terms of the decision that's already been made, but it's going to embarrass possibly the government, humiliate them, and hopefully it will make sure that in future the right consultation and due diligence is done before such huge decisions are made. That, you know, the implications for the industry we've discussed on this podcast many times before, but making decisions with those sorts of implications without having done that consultation and that impact assessment and everything, well, yeah, we all know what that's called, what problems that is causing. So hopefully they will stop and think before they do something like this again.
And Hugh, Louise exactly right in her analysis, isn't she? The government's stated aim was to discourage wealthy people from buying agricultural land as a way of avoiding inheritance tax. But in trying to achieve that, the government's caused so much misery and damage to farming families. Tom Martin and others arguing that the government should have consulted more widely, and if it had done, it would have realised this and introduced the policy in a way that achieved its aims without causing so much collateral damage.
Yeah, look, you can argue either way, can't you? I mean, look, judicial review is about process. It's not about policy. Let's be absolutely clear about that. That's Billy Basic's law. This forces the government potentially to carry out a full consultation. And as Louise said, it may create some embarrassment because if the consultation happens and there's an all 1,000 or however many thousand responses to the consultation say, this is nonsense, it's not going to work, it's there in black and white. But there's plenty of times also, though, remember, where government has done their own thing. You've only got to look at the Iraq War. There was no consultation there. It even went to the High Court. The government was found in breach of not having consultation, but it didn't stop us going to war in Iraq and all of the consequences that happened then. But yeah, it is we know it's an ill thought out policy. The collateral damage has been way, way more than the tax that it was originally going to raise. And at the end of the day, if you happen to be a person with a lot of money and you want to pass it to the next generation and you've got hard cash, there was an option to put it into farmland or do whatever. Whereas now, you know, you're still going to go and find some wheeze whether you take it offshore. And actually, we've seen with the offshore thing going on, the amount of disinvestment or divestment from the UK territory out of the UK economy as a result of these policies. And that's also had collateral damage. It may have meant the socialists can feel a bit good about themselves, but equally, it's had a huge impact on the London economy. It's had an impact on the values of things. It's had a massive impact. Now, it could be that everything settles down nicely and all the values return to normal and everyone feels that everything's a lot fairer now because they haven't got all this money tied up in the UK when they shouldn't have. But actually, in reality, it's made the UK economy poorer as a result.
Thank you, Hugh. Now, we reported last week that the NFU has decided to stand down in its battle against the government over inheritance tax, at least for now. But has this judicial review made that decision look a little premature? It's a question Farmers Weekly's Phil Case asked NFU President Tom Bradshaw. This is Tom's reply.
Well, no, because the conversation that we had with the Prime Minister about what I said to him in that meeting was we do not support the policy. We will be campaigning on this in the future. But if you find a way of making substantive change to this policy, we will end our campaign. We can't renege on that commitment at the top level of government. And so when the significant change has been made, and I don't think anybody will disagree with that, there are many farmers that are now in a better position. And so our lobbying continues. On Friday, our local branch met with Cami Badenoch, James Cleverly and Neil Hudson. And so that's the lobbying work that will continue to try and influence the policy for the future. The next political opportunity, we will be actively campaigning on this policy to get further change. But for the moment, we just ratchet it down, continue with the lobbying and work on the multitude of other areas that are impacting farm profitability.
NFU President Tom Bradshaw there, explaining to Farmers Weekly's Phil Case why the union has called a halt to its campaign against inheritance tax. Louise, some firm words there from Tom Bradshaw. Do you think that was the right decision?
That's a really difficult question to answer, Johann. What do I personally think? I think possibly that they were a bit premature in ending it. But I know that there's a huge to-do list as far as the NFU is concerned. You know, they've spent an awful lot of time on this one issue when there are so many other things that they need to be working with the government on. So I do understand that. What is interesting to me, though, is that it only seems to be the NFU that has stopped its campaigning. Other organisations are continuing, and there is still really strong feeling out there that this whole tax policy change is wrong. So the NFU might have ended its campaigning, but other people haven't, and other organisations definitely haven't. So, you know, it isn't actually going to go away, is it?
Hugh, the Country Land and Business Association, just one of those organisations saying that the inheritance tax fight must go on. Tom Bradshaw, though, pointing out that the government with a 160-seat majority is incredibly powerful and there are other things it needs to address. Carrying on without putting words into Tom's mouth would be like banging your head against a brick wall.
Yeah, and he's right. Louise alluded to it earlier. We said it the other week. It's taken up a huge amount of bandwidth, NFU lobbying bandwidth, time and money and resource and effort. And there has been a concession, if you will. It may not be enough. And it, you know, I think everyone's accepting the fact it's probably not enough for some people. There will be many sort of sub 500 acre family farms that, you know, they sort of missed the bullet, as it were, if it's a married couple. But there'll be many people that aren't lucky enough to be in that position. But yeah, the argument that you can't push all your resources into one thing all of the time in terms of lobbying effort and campaigning is a valid one. And I think it's, to be fair as well, from the NFU's position, perhaps they haven't communicated it hard enough, but they still fundamentally believe that the policy is wrong, but they've got lots of other things to concentrate on at the same time. And it may be that every time it comes up in a meeting with the NFU president and ministers, there is a reminder that's put out there. This is also underlying fundamentally wrong policy, which is why people aren't investing in this minister, which is why this isn't happening. So I'm sure they're still going to mention it, but the time and the resource and the banners and everything else, yes, they've perhaps decided to step that down. And if it bought them the concession they have, fair enough. And what would you do if you were Tom Bradshaw? If you were in that meeting with the Prime Minister and you risked throwing the whole thing away, and if the Prime Minister had turned around and said, you know, Thomas said, no, mate, we're not doing it for less than 10 million on the threshold, and Sakir turned around and said, no, do one, back to 1 million, and you had it sort of in your hand and it burnt away, you know, was it bird in the hand is worth two in the bush or whatever? It's where we are. And ultimately, we've just got to hope that this policy is fundamentally changed if we get to a change of government at the next election. And that's, 3.5 years away.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast. The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
Now, could beef and dairy producers have to pay a licence to farm? Well, the government plans to introduce environmental permits for cattle farmers, bringing the sector into line with the pig and poultry industries. It's all part of a wider drive to clean up England's water system. Government figures show agriculture is responsible for about 40% of river and groundwater pollution in England, but the plans have understandably prompted concern from the livestock sector. Farmers Weekly's Phil Case spoke to NFU Livestock Chairman and Cotswolds beef farmer David Barton.
I think an industry-led approach will give a far better result than the EA trying to environmentally permit what they call intensive beef, which no one can actually define as yet. So I think it will be far better to go down that route. And I think what we've seen is something like 30% pass rate on the first inspection. Then it goes to 80 or 90%, and it's generally it would be a soil management or something like that. It will be a written issue that they've missed. It's not an issue of pollution on farms. It's a small issue that can be very quickly rectified. So I think as an industry we can deal with that, and that's the route I'd like to go. And I think it would just be over-regulation if we're not careful.
And talking about your own business in Gloucestershire with your beef salt of the head, what could it mean, for example, for you if these regulations did come into effect?
Yeah, well, I think the way I look at it is that we actually had an inspection this year, and what that resulted in was I did have to make a change. My diesel tank wasn't compliant, so my livestock business was absolutely fine, and yet as a livestock farm, I would have failed as far as the EA are concerned. But it actually has nothing to do with livestock. But my point here is, if I'd had to pay for a permit, that money's been spent. As it was, we've invested in a new tank that is now compliant, and that's fine. I'm happy with that. But you can only spend that money once, and I think it'd be far better to take that route. And the EA have been funded, and they've had double funding for their inspections, so they're already doing that. And I think this is just overdoing it. And as a sector, we want to grow this sector. We want the confidence to do that. This was just not confidence, and it's just overdoing it the whole time.
I suppose that beef prices have come back a bit. They had been extremely buoyant, but they're still pretty good. But this is just another cost, isn't it? That's going to be applied for farmers, and I suppose we don't even know what that cost is. Exactly,
and if we're not careful, when we look at import-export, the imported products that come in, government, when they start going down this route of regulation, they've got to make sure that the imported product is to exactly the same standard. Otherwise, they just simply disadvantage us. As a sector, we want to grow this sector because there's great opportunity. Our product's required without question, and you see that around the world. And we do have the best product in the world. So I'm very keen to make sure we keep that status and all aspects, and environment is included there. But this is government over-regulating.
NFU Livestock Board Chairman David Barton talking to Phil Case. Hugh, this has been, to coin a phrase, an issue that's been bubbling under for quite a while now. Environmental permits, a licence to farm, call it what you will. It looks like it's probably going to happen.
Well, we don't know because they haven't actually launched on the specifics of permitting for large, or they deem to be large bovine units, cattle units, be they beef or dairy. We haven't actually seen the consultation. It's probably not going to come till later this year. It probably first started rearing its permitty head when we were talking about ammonia 5, 6, 7 years ago. And there was a lot of talk around ammonia, and agriculture is 88% of the UK's. That's the last set of figures I saw about 3 or 4 years ago. Agriculture is 88% of the UK's ammonia. That's where it comes from. And a good half of that comes from livestock. And then if you halve that again, you've got monogastrics, pigs and poultry. And then the other quarter, a bit of the other quarter is ruminants. And there's a bit of that quarter that's storage. We know when the urea inhibitor was put in by force the other year, that sorted out a fair chunk of the arable sector's ammonia emissions. So that's probably where it stems back to. And then it's sort of tied up and merged up with the farming rules for water stuff. But I mean, ostensibly, it's what they're talking, certainly the EA are talking about, is effectively mimicking a similar thing that the pig and poultry industry have to do and comply with, which is paying a huge amount of money for the initial license, and then paying tens of thousands of pounds potentially, and then paying a fair chunk every year to renew it. And it's effectively, when you speak to these operators, once they've got over the first application, it's effectively an annual fee for a piece of paper. There's not much else happens other than, you pay a lot of money and get a bit of paper.
Hence me referring to it, Hugh, as a licence to farm. It might be called something else, but that is essentially what it is, targeting so-called intensive beef and dairy farms. But DEFRA and the Environment Agency, they don't seem to be able to say exactly what constitutes an intensive farm. They don't seem to have a handle on it in terms of livestock numbers, land area, or indeed stocking density, where to draw the line.
Well, you could say in some respects it's conveniently grey, isn't it? You could clearly differentiate between, say, for example, a dairy unit with slurry system running versus beef unit with straw bedding, farmyard manure type system running. They're two very different things. And actually, if we're talking about ammonia, one of the biggest single mitigations for ammonia is to use a straw-based system. Now, clearly, that's not that an attractive proposition for most dairy producers. There aren't many. There are some, but there aren't many dairy producers left producing dairy that bed their cows on straw for all the reasons we know about around udder health and all that sort of stuff. But it is quite a grey area in terms of, and then, is it about the number of cattle you have on the holding? But then it should be around, the size of the holding, because you could have 500 cattle on an acre in a shed, or you could have 500 cattle roaming over 2,000 acres. They're two very different entities. So there are lots of ways to skin the sort of proverbial cat, as it were. One pointer you could look at, for example, some of the definitions, the graduations or calibration that's used with MVZ calculations when you're doing your Nmax and you're looking at how long you house for, you're looking at the age and the type of the livestock, et cetera, which gives you your Nmax figure. So, it wouldn't be on the wit of man to go down something along those lines. But at the moment, it's a pretty confused picture. And there's, I think the big thing here is this is just another payment for the sake of a payment. What is it actually going to deliver? And at the end of the day, the EA are going around and doing lots of farm inspections already. So why the heck do they need to come out and, they don't even need to do an inspection. They just need to license you because you've got X number of cows on your farm. It's purely a cash-raising exercise. If they're going out and doing their inspections, to be fair, they've done a really good job. Not good for some farmers because they've had to massively restructure or they've gone out of dairy or things have changed, but they've been doing a pretty good job getting around farms over the last 2 or 3 years where they were absent for 20 or 30 years. So if they get round all these farms, then what's the issue? Why do you need to license them?
Louise, cattle not the only things in the firing line. We've not mentioned it yet, but a possible clampdown on farmers spreading sewage sludge too. That'll be of interest to your arable farmers, all part of the same water strategy, an attempt to clean up our water system.
Yes, it's all part of this water white paper, isn't it? So they're launching a consultation on whether they should reform the regulations that govern the use of sewage sludge on farmland in England. And I think that there are 3 options that they are consulting on. So, and they vary in their sort of seriousness, if you like. So, the first one would involve completely revoking the current regulations and then bringing sewage sludge use fully under the environmental permitting regulations. And then the second option there is just to amend and update the existing regulations. And the third one is just making changes through non-regulatory measures. So, such as revising the standards and giving more guidance. So that's where we are with that. I think it's probably worth saying that this has been in the sights for a while. There is concern about contaminants that may or may not be contained in sewage sludge. It does any applications that are made, they do have to meet strict safety standards already. And there are obviously grazing and harvesting restrictions that apply. So, it's not as though this has just been carrying on, without any sort of control or regulation. It does already exist, but they're really looking at whether they need to tighten those up. And I know that there's been quite a lot of pressure put on the government by various pressure groups and environmental groups who really think that, I think it's the forever chemicals, I think PFAs are they, that they're really concerned about. So, it's going to have a strict look and we'll have to see what the outcome is.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast. The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
You're listening to the Farmers Weekly podcast. Welcome along wherever you're listening to us from. You can email us podcast@fwi.co.uk. And if you're in the UK itself, you can message us by texting the word farm followed by a message to 88440. Louise, out and about this week as the Arable Conference season continues. Lots of events going on at the moment. We'll talk about one of them in just a few minutes, but you've received a particularly nice message.
Yes, I did. And I'm just going to give a quick shout out to Will Dakin, who farms up in Northumberland. He took the time to tell me how much he enjoys the Farmers Weekly podcast. So thank you for that, Will. I have to say, Will managed to win the bean yen with a yield of 8.15 tonnes a hectare with his winter beans. So well done to you, Will. Hope you keep listening to the podcast and you carry on enjoying it.
Yeah, Will Dakin, an absolutely bumper bean crop, and we'll have more on the yen, the Yield Enhancement Network, in a few minutes, bringing people together with some amazing output statistics and some fantastic crops. First though, Hugh, you've got a message yourself, or at least one that you want to put out there.
I just want to mention Bockett's Farm Park, which is my local open farm up the road. It's been going for over 30 years. I was fortunate enough, I was privileged and lucky enough to work there. I did 2 lambings there in the mid-90s when I finished at college. And I can tell you, if ever you get the opportunity to lamb sheep in front of 300 or 400 eager Surrey residents on a Sunday morning, it's a sort of thing that's a skill that you need for life. Particularly when you sort of, something doesn't quite go right and you have to sort of freestyle your way out of it. Anyway, do an amazing job, as indeed do all the farm parks across the country at sort of trying to link most of the population that doesn't farm with those of us that do farm. But Bockett's Farm won 5 awards at the National Farm Attractions Network Annual Awards. I didn't know such a thing existed this week. So very best of luck, or very big congratulations to them, and indeed all the other winners that were at that event. And a big thank you to all the people that do run all the farm parks everywhere, because it is damn hard work. It's hard work farming normally, but when you've got X thousand people traipsing around the place, pointing at everything, and you have to look after them and feed them and do everything else, it's really hard work. So well done, farm parks everywhere.
A shout out for farm parks, and a shout out too for McDonald's this week. An interesting and surprising announcement, Hugh.
I don't think it's surprising, because not many people seem to be buying it in the supermarkets. Basically, they're going down to having one vegan option on their menu, having done the whole plant-based thing, the McPlant, and had various options for those not wishing to partake of animal flesh. And then they turned around this week and said, yeah, right, we'll just have the one thing available. Because it must cost them an absolute fortune to stock it, and the supply chain costs, and that hardly anyone's buying it. And it's similarly reflected when you look in the supermarkets, isn't it? When you look at the sort of peak vegan, you had a couple of shelf units of plant-based products, modified flavoured soya in the shape of chops and bacon. And now you're lucky if you get half a shelf unit doing the same thing. And most of the time, whenever I go into any of my local supermarkets, which I regularly do, they're always generally discounted, particularly if it's early in the week. So that's playing havoc with their supply chains as well.
Something else playing havoc with supply chains, Louise, food inflation this week.
Yeah, food inflation has picked up again, and that I think has taken some people by surprise. So the figures for January showed that there was a renewed increase in the cost of meat, fish, and fruit. So that has really put, food inflation up. I think the shop price inflation accelerated to 1.5% in this last month. So that is considerably more than it was in December. The non-food categories, I have to say, gone up as well, but not nearly as much as food. And, this is something that we've discussed, haven't we, on the podcast before, the whole supply and demand dynamics and what's going on with that. None of us are surprised, I don't think. And it's interesting that I think it was the boss of Morrison saying that food prices are going up, and they will continue to go up over the coming months. So not good news for those people on limited budgets. But there you go. It's something that's happened, and we're not surprised.
No, we're not surprised. And actually, if you think about it, it's an unwelcome reality, isn't it? That the percentage, I don't know what the figure is today, but there's a figure always quoted, isn't it, about the percentage of household incomes. If you go back to the late 1960s, percentage of household income income spent on food was around 35-40%, and the lowest it got was probably around the sort of noughties, early noughties, probably got down to about 8%. So it gave people far, far more disposable income over that period. And now we're starting to see a reversal of that as well because of these increased prices, which we know why, beef is high. We know why the energy. There's also some argument to say that post-Ukraine shock, a lot of those supply chains kept or have kept their prices up because they're making reasonable margin by doing so because of the energy shocks that they did have. Admittedly, a lot of them are also still suffering huge, price increases around energy because the ex-farm product, the unadulterated product, so it's not surprising that beef goes up because there's not much you can do to beef and people seem to be switching back on to unadulterated, if you will, sort of pure protein options. But for the processed stuff, it's like the loaf of bread thing, isn't it? Oh, yeah, the price of wheat's gone up by £3, so we need to put loaves of bread up by at least 45p, and it's not even a penny, less than a penny of wheat that's in a loaf of bread. So a lot of that, you could argue, whilst there is tightness in supply and production of some commodities, not all, as arable farmers will tell you, equally some, I think, is locked in. It's been baked in since Ukraine and the pandemic.
Yeah, the House of Commons Library, used by MPs and their researchers, this week warning that food inflation having a huge impact on the cost of living. Food inflation about 0% in 2021, so 5 years ago, but UK food prices rising by a huge 38.6% between November 2020 and November 2025. Louise, paying more for food, something we're all having to get used to, farmers and non-farmers alike.
Absolutely, it is. And it's a topic of conversation everywhere I go at the moment. And it's a dilemma, really, isn't it? You've got whole sectors of farming at the moment who aren't making any money at all. A few sectors where things are looking better. You've got these prices skyrocketing up as far as some people are concerned. And it all seems a bit out of kilter and out of balance. And I have to say that I can't actually see food prices coming down. I can't see that changing. I can actually only see them going one way at the moment. So, where this is all going to even out, I don't know. I mean, we know that there's a profitability review on the table with the government at the moment. So we'll see what they decide or what recommendations they decide to do about that. But walk into the shop, wherever you do your food shopping, you're paying more for it. And that is going to continue.
Shining a light on profitability then, Hugh, also shining a light on food security. The government this week accused of sitting on a report about food security and, indeed, believe it or not, nuclear war.
Well, nuclear war, I should emphasise, over in the sort of Asia area of India, Pakistan. What this was a report that the government was accused of suppressing. It was in the Times originally on Friday, and then actually George Monbiot picked it up in one of his environmental columns in The Guardian early this week. And effectively, the report, it's just a risk assessment, a report by the Joint Intelligence Committee, the JIC, which obviously oversees MI5 and MI6. And the study entitled Global Biodiversity Loss, Ecosystem Collapse and National Security. There you go. That's a cheery read if ever you need one. It was put together with help of the JIC. Now, you could argue that whoever put it together might be a bit environmentally biased because it talks about all the usual things about, we need to cut down on the amount of animal production and so on and so forth. But I think for me, what's significant is we talk about all of the stuff we need to do to make our farms more climate resilient and to make and to reduce our emissions. And it could be argued that over the last year or so, the sort of focus of that has drifted a bit. So the NFU getting rid of their head of net zero and stuff like that. But the supply chains are still very much focused on it. But I think whatever happens, it is a serious thing. And actually, when the JIC are talking about it, this isn't just some tie-dye greeny stuff. This is stuff, whether we're talking about weather patterns changing, drought causing mass migration. It talks about the pressure on food production into the 2030s becoming ever greater on a more limited availability of agricultural land that can actually support growing of crops to feed people. So it really is a big thing. It is there. And we really do need to step up to the plate. And we've said it before in terms of our UK resilience as a supply chain, whether we're talking about actually making sure that there is enough food to go around going forward, whether it's around fertilizer supply, whether it's around water supply, all of that stuff. It's really serious, and it's not something to take lightly, and it's something that we should all be focused on at every level in the supply chain.
Especially when food prices are high and supplies are at risk, it all filters through to the commodity markets, Hugh. And what are those markets telling us this week?
Thank you very much, Johann. Finished steer deadweight this week. Oh, it's still gone down, but not as much as it has latterly. It just dropped slightly less than half a penny, 642.8. The live weight, 360.6. That's gone back 2p on the week. Sheep ring slackening off. It would seem a bit of heat's gone out of the sheep market, which has been pretty solid for months now. Obviously, we're all looking forward to Ramadan, which I think is coming up next month. But this week, the SQQ dropped from 713.6 on the deadweight down to 688.4. So quite a drop. 325.4 is your live weight, a slight increase on last week's lamb SQQ. Pig price, I'm afraid, dropped back about a penny, 80p, 191.4 this week. And the arable markets are almost as fun-packed as the global biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and national security report, with feed wheat £162.60. That's gone back 90p on the week. Milling wheat £170.70. That's gone back £3 on the week. Feed barley, it's actually gone up by about £1. So there you go. Beef farmers clocking this cheap barley. Oilseed rate 410.50. That's gone up at £2. Feed peas 209. That's dropped back 80p. Feed beans 205.4. That's gone up 40p. Red diesel, not too spiky actually, given all that was going on the other week. 67.44. That has gone up about 0.2 of a penny on the week. So not too bad a movement there.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast. The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
And finally, when things aren't going quite right and times are tough, we can sometimes forget to celebrate our achievements. Well, that wasn't a problem at this week's Yen Awards, the Yield Enhancement Network, which brings together arable farmers to improve farm productivity. Louise went along and spoke to arable grower Richard Budd, who grows combinable crops on the Kent-Sussex border.
You've won an oilseed rape award for a yield of 7.61 tonnes per hectare. And when you were asked about that, you mentioned that you're drilling later now. Can you just expand on that a bit?
Yeah, so we drill for the last 4 years, we've drilled oilseed rape around about the 20th of September. We started drilling rape later, as really we were finding if we got a lot of heavy rain around about the August bank holiday, just when we sort of traditionally, that was the time you drilled oilseed rape in the south of England, we were finding a lot of crop failure, and we were replanting that crop middle of the month by the time we'd evaluated the crop and decided it wasn't going to go. And we were finding actually that those yields of those later crops were actually better. And coincidentally, we also found that there was no cabbage stem flea beetle in it, and the vigour was much better as well. So we took that sort of coincidental finding and then ran with it and started to look at different varieties, different seed rates, and how to then make the best opportunity of that. I think the other key difference is that compared to a decade ago, oilseed rape in the south is actively growing for the whole year. We don't get a latent period we don't get a hibernation period through the winter. We've had active growth all the way through. So you're getting better canopies and actively growing canopies all the way through.
You've been involved with Yen, I think, for quite some time now, since 2018. You've been very successful over the years. What have you gained from it?
It's a massive data set you're gaining every year, and that data set allows you to look and see how your fields are performing. I mean, we tend to try and use the same fields across crops. So the same field that we put yen wheat in, we'll put yen oilseed rape, yen bean in, and we can then start to see trends and see how we're building that field and whether the differences things we're trialling and trying are actually making a real difference over a long term.
What do you have to say to those who talk about high yields being too expensive to achieve? And I mean both from a financial and an environmental perspective. Well,
I think we've seen today with the data that we've already been presented that it's very obvious that high yields, high gross margin crops are going to pay in the long run, and that a lot of the high yielding crops are the ones that people have got the best profits out of. And at times when prices are low as they are at the moment, yield is king, because if you haven't got any wheat in your shed, you're not going to be making very much cash flow for the year.
Doing more with what you already have, or producing more and impacting less, however you like to put it, that's been a real topic of discussion today. How much further can you go with yields on your farm?
It's a good question, and it's one that probably we can't actually answer fully. A lot of it's going to come down to climate and the effects that we have. A lot of it will also come down to forces outside of our control. So obviously the innovation, what is going to be allowed in terms of genetic potential breeding, and also loss of the sort of mainstay agrochemicals that we've currently got, and potential legislation on nitrogen. So there's a lot of factors outside of our control. All that we can carry on doing is looking at trends within the crops that we're growing, seeing opportunities, and sort of evaluating new technologies as they come along, and looking to see how they can fit into the farming system, whether they're economically viable to your business.
That's arable grower Richard Budd talking to Louise. Also among the yen winners was Oxfordshire farmer David Passmore, who grew a fantastic winter wheat crop, which yielded an amazing 14.24 tonnes per hectare, almost twice the national average. Louise asked David how he did it.
Good question. It's long-term planning in a mixed farm rotation. But one thing I think did help it this year, it was over chalk, and chalk in a dry summer still most years yields. It holds moisture.
I think you've been successful in this competition before. Have you reached the top now? Can you go any further with these wheat yields?
Yes. I think there's one you have to think you can, and looking at, so I took some turned out to be very good pictures of a crop back in June, and you look at it and almost now you think, why didn't it yield more? But actually last year was a very challenging harvest. Natural yields were down 10-15%, so you just think if we'd had another inch of rain early June, this could have been a much better crop. And we every year you think it can be slightly more perfect. So there's still the challenges there.
Okay, so there's still more to go, but this is the last yen year as we know it. What will you do now, and how will you keep the legacy going on your farm?
I've learned a huge amount from yen. The people in this room have. You look at some of the yields here, astonishing. Oilseed rape at over 3 tonne a hectare, beans at over 3 tonne a hectare, and people doing them year in, year out. And that's, they've learned from this yen project. It's 12, 13 year. I've learned a huge amount. So obviously that legacy of that learning will carry on. We're looking now about how we can move the yen forward, possibly in a different format. We've got some adopt funding for a project with Daniel Kindred, which is a sort of yen live and local, because what it needs to do is spread wider amongst the middle 50% of farmers. And it's one thing slightly hasn't grabbed some exceptional farmers in this room, but it sort of needs the middle 50% of farmers saying, hang on, why is he getting 14 tonne a hectare and I'm getting 9? If you can lift the 9 to 9.5 on the learnings of 14.5, that's brilliant, and it's broad it's broad scale. But the data set they've developed, we've seen some of the slides here this morning, is stunning.
That's Oxfordshire farmer David Passmore and arable grower Richard Budd at this week's Yen Awards. Louise, you went along, some absolutely fantastic yields.
Absolutely amazing results, especially when you consider what the year was like last year. So we had the drought and the very high temperatures, but some of these yields were just outstanding. I mean, 3 of these farmers had oilseed rape yields of over 7 tonnes a hectare. There was actually a new world record set for oilseed rape, and that was by Tim Lammerman, who farms up in Lincolnshire, and he achieved 7.71 tonnes a hectare. So just, amazing results, really, because they're not necessarily spending a lot more on their crops, but they are just consistently getting these amazing results. What is good about this group is that they do share their knowledge and share their experience amongst each other. So everybody is learning, and this is an initiative that's been going since 2012. So 13 years, and they have just been making progress all that time, really. They're very committed and enthusiastic. So fantastic to see yields like that. I think you need to just sort of bear in mind that wheat yields were about 13% down in 2025 compared to the yen average, across the board. So these amazing figures were, just brilliant. Great to see.
It's staggering figures, Louise. I mean, that wheat figure on Oxfordshire land, which isn't renowned for its amazingly lush soils, is it? How are they doing it? Are they just optimising everything, or have they got some secret tonic hidden in the greenhouse?
Well, that's a really good question, Hugh. And there has, in the past been a bit of criticism, if you like, of yen, that it's not all about yield. So, in the sort of wash-up session this year, ADAS did some analysis, and they did find that these high-yielding crops were the most profitable, and these farmers necessarily spending a lot more on them. And I think, their figures show that you need less than 3 tonnes a hectare to pay for all the inputs. So that was really quite interesting to look at those margins and to look at what they had done. The other really salient point in current times is that these crops had reduced greenhouse gas intensities by about a third. So that just goes to show, yield has been a bit of a dirty word, hasn't it, in the last few years? And there's been an awful lot of talk about, cutting input costs and that's being a better way. But I think this ADAS analysis that they did this time, it really did, show that that's not necessarily the right approach. Another thing about these high-yielding crops, which everybody would want to get this out of, is that they are more effective at capturing nitrogen from non-synthetic sources. So, that's all about having good root systems and what have you. But some really interesting thing, and I think what we were able to see that yield pays, no doubt about it. These crops are using their inputs more efficiently. They're not necessarily receiving more input. So that's good. Carbon footprints are down. What's not to like?
Well, what's not to like, I guess, is that this year is the last year of yen as we know it. Sponsorship is falling away, and they are looking at ways to try and continue it.
Well, there are little bits of it that are continuing. So, for example, there's the yens that are done for the pulse crops, for peas and beans. I think they are going to be continuing with PGRO, so that's good news. I think also there's yen nutrition, so when they do the grain analysis at the end of the season and find out how successful they've been with that, I think that is continuing with ADAS. And then there was discussion about how it might continue and in what form it might continue. And there isn't anything really to report on that. It would be absolutely wonderful, wouldn't it, if someone could come along and pick it up and keep this going, because this is exactly the sort of knowledge sharing and collaboration that we need in the industry. I think ADAS said that it cost them about £1,000 an entry, to do all the metrics and produce all the reports. So that's £250,000 a year. So it's a considerable sum, I suppose, but it's not impossible to find and to do. And I think there'd be huge value from it.
Louise, surely this is somewhere where HDB could spend some money quite effectively, given that some of their arable offerings have come under the kibosh a bit recently, or come up for criticism. I mean, this is a no-brainer place to spend levy payers' money to learn how to do it the best you possibly can and to optimise all the resources you've got and optimise your yield. It's a no-brainer, isn't it?
Well, it's interesting you say that, Hugh, because I think there are a lot of people in the room this week that would agree with you. And I have to say they are the obvious, or that is the obvious organisation to pick this up and run with it. The system is there. We know it works. These participating farmers get these amazingly detailed reports. Well, with the advent of AI and everything like that, those things are going to become much easier and more cost effective, I would imagine, to produce. So I don't think it would be a very difficult thing for the AHDB to do at all. And I think there would be huge value from them picking it up and doing it. And I agree with you, Hugh. It's an obvious use, good use of levy payers' money.
We'll certainly want to watch the future of yen, and let's hope it does continue. And congratulations to all those growers who've entered the Yen Awards over the years. That's about it for this episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast. We do hope you've enjoyed what you've heard. If you have, please do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you've really enjoyed what you've heard, please, as always, do leave us a 5-star review. We'll be back next week with all the latest news, views and analysis of all the big stories affecting UK agriculture. But for now, until next week, I'm Johann.
I'm Louise Impey.
And I'm Hugh Broom.
Thank you for listening.